Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest. Absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southern-appalachian-herbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southern-appalachian-herbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs. Hey, y'all. Welcome to this week's show. What a beautiful day it is. It's afternoon. I like to record these on a Sunday afternoon. I just see it as sitting down having a chat with my friends. And it is just such a beautiful spring day. Today's actually Divine Mercy Sunday, which according to Christian tradition is when the doors of heaven are just wide open and God's mercy is raining down upon the world in a very special way. It's also Easter in the Orthodox Church. So, in several Christian traditions, this is a very significant and important day. It's actually the octave of Easter as well. It's a day that if you have special intentions, if you want to pray for peace in Ukraine or for a special intention, an illness, an ailment, a family member, whatever, this is just a really good day to pause and take a few minutes and do that. But getting on to the topic of herbs, I think it's really interesting. When I think about it, I think a lot of people have trouble finding, we'll say, a school or a tradition of herbal medicine that works really well for them. I know that has been the case for me. I think one of the reasons a lot of people get discouraged using herbs is because they either usually these days it's read something online that said try this, well, or they find it in a book, or they go to a certain herbal practitioner of a certain school of herbal medicine, and they tell them, okay, try this. This is what's going to work. I mean, a lot of herbalists are very bold in actually prescribing herbs for medical conditions, which is something I never do. And they say, this will help you. And the person tries it and it didn't work. Well, why is that? Why is that? Well, there's a lot of reasons. The herbalist Michael Moore, late herbalist, spent a lot of time coming up with a system of herbal energetics to tailor the herb to the individual. And various traditions, of course, have that. I mean, Chinese traditional herbal medicine, Ayurveda, a lot of herbal traditions have an energetic system that helps really tailor the herbal formulas to the individual. But even then, that really doesn't always work in every case. I think right now, probably the most popular schools of herbal medicine are Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine. And I think there are various reasons for that. They've been very popularized in popular culture these days. They're very ancient and traditional schools of medicine. They are extremely effective when used properly in the right circumstance with the right person, and they're very formalized. It would be very difficult for a person to learn, say, American herbalism. Where do you start, right? I mean, America is a nation of various Native American tribes, many of which, not all of which actually, have their own herbal traditions. Not all tribes use a lot of herbs. That surprises a lot of people. And what also surprises a lot of people is that within, say, the materia medica, the herbs used by a certain tribe, especially for your more isolated tribes, they may have used very few herbs because they had very few conditions. So a lot of people I've spoken with are really disappointed. I mean, they searched out and tried to find an herbal for whatever Native American tribe either they were part of, they're related to, or was indigenous to their area. Actually, no people are indigenous to any area. I mean, all parts of the world have been occupied by various people at various times. That's sort of a mistaken concept to believe, like, Cherokees have always lived in Cherokee, North Carolina. No, they've been there for, I don't know, 1,000 years or so. They may have been there for a few thousand years. Uh, they may have been there for 10,000 years, but there was a time when they weren't there. There's incredible archaeological evidence. We always assume that Native Americans came across the land bridge, essentially between Alaska and Russia during the Ice Age. Seems some did, but a lot probably were Polynesians that came via basically canoes across just thousands and tens of thousands of miles of ocean, and probably hit South America first and came up. So everybody comes from somewhere else. I don't like to talk about indigenous peoples or indigenous plants because all plants travel. I mean, seeds are spread by the wind, seeds are spread by birds. People say this is a native plant and this is a weed. No, it's just the native plant's been here longer. We can't really with certainty say any one plant originated in any one place. It just doesn't work that way. Life is always moving and changing. But back to the topic at hand, American herbalism would, of course, start with the peoples who were here longest, the various Native American tribes. Then it would be the influences of all the European settlers. And it would be the influences of all the peoples who have populated America over the last, 200 and some years. I guess you could say 300 years or so. That's a lot of people for a lot of different cultures. You can go to an Amish community. They're going to use plants and herbs that they've been using for a long time. You could go to the Appalachian Mountains where I'm from, and we've got our own, unique style of herbal medicine that combines British, Celtic, German, and several Native American tribes traditions into, a coherent system of herbal medicine. You could go to the Gullas off the coast of South Carolina, or some of the various areas in Louisiana, Mississippi, where certain black cultures have been around for a couple hundred years, and they have ways of using plants. I mean, growing up where I did down the swamps of North Carolina, we had root women. Root women were oftentimes black women who were herbalists, or they were Native American, they were Lumbee Indians, or they were Walkamalls, and I'll get on into all that in a little bit later. And when we got up the mountain, there were root women who were usually Scots Irish, or Cherokee, or Catawba. So wherever you went, there was a different tradition of herbal medicine using the plants that grew in that area and very influenced by the culture. So if someone were to say, I want to study American herbal medicine, wow, it's a huge topic. I mean, it's a really huge topic, and there's some really good, very expensive books, like the America Materia Medica. There's the energetics of Western herbs. They try to make a coherent discipline of all these various traditions. Some of the better herb schools do that. I think like I said, Michael Moore was the guy that really kind of did it first, and in my opinion, did it best. Even though we would not have gotten along in life. I mean, come on. If you've ever read his work or taken any of his classes, some of them are still available online, even though he passed away several years ago. He and I would have been like oil and water. I mean, we would not have mixed, but I have huge respect for him in what he did. And Seven Song kind of continues that tradition. There's several good schools. There's several good schools. I'm not knocking any one of them, and I'm not saying any of them are less complete because each one is teaching the herbs in that area or the herbs at hand in the tradition they know. That's legitimate. That's legitimate as going to uh, traditional Chinese medicine school that is set up just like a medical school, or an Ayurveda. I mean, set up just like a Western medical school where you're actually like a real doctor, learning allopathic medicine, except you're learning herbs and herbal formulas and energetics. But it's just vast, it's complex. It's hard for people to wrap their minds around. In my herbal journey, so to speak, I began as an apprentice in the Appalachian Mountains, Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina. When I was about 15, I began learning about herbal medicine. And that was the Appalachian, Scots Irish, English, Catawba, Cherokee influence. And those are the people I learned from. I mean, people from all those backgrounds. The other side of my family, the other half of my life spent growing up was down in the coastal swamps of North Carolina. Um, there, the main influence is the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. The Lumbees are the largest Indian tribe in North Carolina, 50,000 members. And they have a really good and unique system of herbs because it is very diverse. The Lumbee tribe is a mixed people. In North Carolina, there's still more tribes than in most places. We've got, the Cherokees and the Catawbas in the western part of the state. In the east part of the state, we've got the Waccamaws, the Halila-Saponi, various remnants of smaller tribes that are still around from the Chocorras. The Chocorras actually originate sort of around the Georgetown, South Carolina area. Um, PDs, Santees, those are tribes that have, there are very few of them left. They've pretty much been absorbed into the Lumbee tribe. Redbone is another one. There's several swamps of North Carolina, and going into that area of South Carolina were very remote for a very long time. There weren't a lot of Revolutionary and Civil War battles in that area because there just weren't a lot of people there. It was a place where a lot of various branches, remnants of Native American tribes, especially after the smallpox epidemic, kind of went and kind of hid out away from the colonies where they could be a little more isolated and not catch, the diseases the Europeans were bringing over. And speaking of that, a lot of people make the mistake of saying that the U.S. government purposefully poisoned Native Americans with smallpox. That was actually the British. So, it's kind of trendy these days to blame America for everything and to worship the British for some reason. But the British were slave trading Indian killers long before America was founded. And I'm not sure why we think they're so great. We did, after all, fight 2 wars just to get away from them. And I say that as someone of very strong British heritage. My ancestors were actually the Catholic kings of England before the Protestant so-called Reformation. The British killed, they say, maybe 100 to 1,000 to 1 million Native Americans by purposely infecting them with smallpox. And a lot of those tribes got away as far away as they could from the English in New England at that point and ended up in the swamps of North Carolina. A lot of other tribes just kind of blended in. It was a place where a lot of escaped slaves hid out, a lot of Irish indentured servants, an area where a lot of Scots Irish who were not welcome in a lot of more English areas were. And the Lumbees are a very mixed tribe with very many roots and branches. I mean, there are probably 5 or 10 distinct Indian tribes that became part of the Lumbee tribe, plus African, plus Irish and Scots Irish, and very mixed people, and they all brought in their herbal medicine. And so, it was really great for me to grow up around that as well. And I actually have a lot of family in the Lumbee tribe. Take this with a grain of salt, but one of my relatives did a DNA test, supposedly saying we have no Native American blood. Okay, I'll buy that. I'm so pale I can stand in front of a sheetrock wall and fade right in, right? But I am related to so many people in the tribe. We share the same last name that, put it this way, there are either a whole lot of white folks that are passing as Lumbee Indians, or there are a whole lot of Lumbee Indians who were passing as white folks somewhere along my family tree. It's always been a little matter of controversy who actually was, as we say in our family, Lum and who wasn't Lum, but a lot of Lumbee words ended up in our family language as well. It would have been very common in, say, my great grandmother's time for us to call coffee or tea Ellick. Ellick is a Lumbee word for coffee usually, or to say you momic something up. Momic means to screw something up, to mess something up. That's kind of how the old folks in my family spoke. But take it with a grain of salt. Those DNA tests, I'm not sure. But then again, the Lumbee are such a mixed people that you could probably sort that way out one way or another. But if you're interested in Lumbee herbal medicine, which I do think is one of the more comprehensive of the Native American schools of herbal medicine, will say. It's a very good book if you can find it. It's called Herbal Remedies of the Lumbee Indians. It's by Arvis Locklear Ballman and Loretta O. Oxendine. And one of the Lumbee healers you will find mentioned in this book is has the last name of Thompson, just like my great grandfather. So I'm sure there are a bunch of Huggins and all kinds of different Stricklands and all, we're all kind of mixed together down in the swamps of North Carolina, which is a very good thing. As I often comment when people bring up racial issues, I'll point out that I spent half my life in a town where people were the minority. It was largely Lumbee, Indian, and Black, and the kids got along great. No one had a problem with anybody until they got into high school and college and started being taught to be racist. But that's another topic for another day. But I think along my herbal journey, it had such a rich regional and cultural heritage to it, really on both sides of the state. At some point, I wandered off into Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine. I had a lot of back problems really all my life. I was born with bad scoliosis, and it's all healed now, amazingly, through a miraculous healing when I was around the age of 20. I've always had a lot of pain, and I've always had a lot of trouble sleeping. So, when I was in my late teens, I started doing yoga, tall, and I was limber, and I was pretty good at it. And I kind of went down that path until I kind of fell out of it, and I got into Tai Chi and Qigong, and that really got me into traditional Chinese medicine. And for 10 years, I actually studied traditional Chinese medicine. That's really a causal factor of why I stopped using herbs for a while. As strange as that sounds, in Chinese medicine, you're mainly using formulas you buy from an herbal apothecary. And those formulas are tailored for, you'll say you have excess yang or you have excess yin in this organ and this organ's hot and it needs to be cooled. It's a very, it's complex. But uh, my other, main issue being my asthma, I thought I would find those answers to the pain, to sleep, to asthma in traditional Chinese medicine. And just as I had already discovered in Ayurveda, they didn't really work for me all that well. I know that's going to be a very controversial statement. Most herbalists I encounter these days are either schooled in Ayurveda or traditional Chinese medicine, and I'm telling you, they don't work for me very well. Why is that? Well, let's go back to the first of Hippocrates' works, foundation of all Western medicine. He pointed out that just in the region of ancient Greece in the time, there were all these tribes living in different areas that looked different, were built different, had different strengths and weaknesses, tended to suffer more from one illness or another, depending on which tribe and ethnic group they were in the area, and responded to treatments differently. Somehow we forgot that. We kind of came to this idea of everyone is exactly the same. We're all just like cells under a microscope. When in truth, we're the sum total of our genetics and our climate, our region that we live in. I think my dietary philosophy is very common sense, and I think there's a lot of truth to it. I believe the best diet you can eat is what's growing right around you. I don't think foods shipped in from 10,000 miles away and stored and treated with chemicals and chosen so they're going to look really nice on a shelf are going to be as healthy for you as the produce from your own garden or a local farmer, healthy, humanely raised meat or the meat you hunt for, the fish you catch. I believe that food has more vitality, more life force. And I believe eating fresh and local, as people say these days, is one of the main reasons my great grandparents all lived to be about 100 years old. Spending time in the sun, not avoiding tobacco, I mean, all the unhealthy things, eating tons of pork fat, that all the other things that are considered unhealthy now, they did and lived to be in their late 90s and such. I think a fresh local diet is very good for you. I think it's much better for you than the average American diet of processed foods that come from 10,000 miles away. It's a really controversial statement, though, for me to say that about herbs. And I'm not sure why that is, but I firmly believe that the herbs that are growing right around you are going to be the herbs that are best for you. I believe that the herbs your ancestors used, if you're a mix of, say, what's a good example? Americans, for the most part, are so many different ethnicities and races and everything these days. All right, so my heritage. I am significantly French, Irish, and English. with little bits and pieces of a whole lot of different stuff mixed in. there's there's a little German in there. There's a little Polish in there. There's a little Jewish in my heritage. Actually, pretty legendary Jewish in my heritage. Very strong part of our culture at one point in ancient Ireland, of all places. There's different influences in my background, but let's just say I'm predominantly English, Irish, and French. So what herbs am I going to look at? Well, the herbs that work for my ancestors in England, Ireland, and France, they grew up with those herbs. The herbs grew up with them. They learned to use the herbs for their common conditions. I inherited their common strengths and weaknesses, you know, 10,000 generations of strengths and weaknesses. And those herbs they used are probably the herbs that are going to help me best. So, like I said, I kind of fell out of using herbs for almost a decade. I was, using regular old Western medicine. And the reason was the Chinese herbs, herbal formulas, for the most part, that I had been learning about were not working for me. Expert practitioners that I was going to for advice were unable to help me. Kind of common sense when you think about it. I don't have any Indian in my heritage, and I don't have any Asian in my heritage. If you look at my body type, I'm, pretty solidly built, kind of robust kind of guy. I'm 6'4", 210 pounds when I'm lean. I don't gain weight easily, and I don't lose weight easily. My weight stays stable. I'm very strong because really more the way my joints and bones are arranged than anything else. I don't have anything in common with the body type of most people from India or most people from Asia. My complexion's different, my eye color is different, my hair color is different, my musculature is different, my build is different. Why would I assume that I could be treated well, that I could find exactly what I was looking for in a tradition that had no commonality for me? Now, this is from me. I know there are many people of, Western heritage that may be exactly the same as mine, for whom Ayurveda works excellently, or traditional Chinese medicine is the go-to. My introduction into Chinese medicine was a Kung Fu Grandmaster that I've studied with for years, who was actually a local guy from the mountains of North Carolina who had extremely bad digestive and bowel problems. He had colitis to the point that he was just like emaciated and small and kind of wasting away when he was in his teens. He tried all Western medicine. He ended up going to China in the 70s. He ended up in a Shaolin temple learning Kung Fu and Qigong and Tai Chi Chuan, and Chinese medicine healed his digestive issues. And he came home and became a deputy sheriff that would have made Chuck Norris look like a wimp. I mean, I definitely agree that it's not always the case. Traditional herbs for your culture and your makeup are what's going to be best. But I think we make a huge mistake when we overlook what's right around us. Well, as I said before, these, we'll just say, foreign schools of herbalism are very popular these days. And they are for a reason. I mean, the Chinese government puts a lot of money and resources into promoting traditional Chinese medicine as part of their culture, and there, magazines like Yoga Journal, which is, very popular, glossy magazine, has really done a lot to popularize yoga. I mean, I was began studying yoga in the early 90s, and there wasn't much around. And suddenly, Yoga Journal started popping up on grocery store shelves, and everybody was interested in yoga. I mean, Bob Weir of the Grateful Dead was featured on the cover one time. It became very, very popular. So, I mean, that's one thing, but I think it's also sort of a maybe an anti-American or anti-European bias, maybe an anti-white bias. And I don't mean this to sound, like some conspiracy theory or something. I think it's just very much a part of our culture these days that we think non-white cultures have traditional knowledge and wisdom that we lack. I don't think anyone would really disagree with that. I mean, if you look at the way Native Americans are portrayed on television, if you look at the way traditional African tribes or Tibetan monks whatever are portrayed on television, a lot of wisdom and a lot of knowledge about the earth and healing and all that. It's not always true, but it sometimes is. I mean, it's a stereotype because, there's a grain of truth in every stereotype. Having grown up around multiple Native American tribes, having been pretty closely related to and really part of their life and culture and celebration, really all my life, I can tell you there's no difference between uh, an Indian or a Native American and a white person. There's no difference. We're all people. One person's skin may be a shade redder or browner, and one person's hair may be dark, and another person's hair may be light. They're the same, and that's very true, especially like in Eastern North Carolina, where I mean, you have Lumbees that they're very proud of their culture and heritage and do a lot to preserve it and try to keep alive the old words and the old herbs and such. And then you have others that are farmers who drive pickup trucks and they love the Atlanta Braves. By the way, don't ever think that most Indians are offended by the Atlanta Braves. They love them. I grew up a Braves fan, and I mean that's one thing we all came together on. And I mean, there are definitely racial tensions in the area. I mean, the Lumbees and the Ku Klux Klan once had a shooting war. I'm not minimizing anything like that, but most of my friends were Lumbee Indians, and they're just country people. People hunt and fish, and I'm not talking with like bows and arrows, running around loincloths. I knew one guy that had about 5 or 6 deer stands that he called them his deer condos. They were up probably, I don't know, 10, 20 feet off the ground, and they were air conditioned. He had a lazy boy recliner in each one, a TV and a mini fridge, a panoramic view, and he would just sit there, until the deer wandered through. We joked around a lot about his style of hunting and how untraditional it was. Some, Lumbees like Jack Lowry, who founded Cracker Barrel restaurants, very just urbane businessman. There's a mix of people. Some of the Lumbees are the best people I've ever known, most loyal, friendly, wonderful people, and some are outlaw bikers who make their living selling meth. I mean, people are people. No one is special just due to their heritage. And that's true also, Catawbas and Cherokees and Alewa Saponis and Wakamas and Chikoras and everybody I've come into contact with. I mean, I was at the grocery store a couple of years ago and the fellow's last name was Huggins. And we started trying to figure out where we were connected on the family tree. Like I said, one of my great grandparents was a Huggins, and his brother was the chief of the tribe. So we got a little confused as we're going back there, but just country boys hanging out, swapping family recipes. But I think it's kind of become trendy to think that non-white people have special knowledge. It's a broad general statement. I know it's going to be offensive to some people, but you don't necessarily think of Irish herbalism, of which there's a lot. I mean, Irish herbalism is second to Greece, ancient Greece and Rome. We don't know as much about it as we should, thanks to, again, the English and the way they enslaved Ireland, slaughtered people, starved half of them to death, and took half the population and sent it out of the country as indentured servants or slaves. I cannot say anything good about the way the English treated the Irish, uh, but that's truth. The English have a phenomenal herbal medicine history. The most written about, the most prolific writers of the Elizabethan period were certainly, John Parkinson, John Gerard, Nicholas Culpeper. English herbal medicine is really the foundation of modern European herbalism. Germany was the heart of where the Benedictines were working and doing monastic medicine through the Middle Ages. German folk medicine continues to be probably the most accepted and vibrant form of herbalism in European medicine. Poland has a phenomenal history of herbal medicine. But when we think about herbs, it comes to mind, the little Chinese guy in the shop, little dark shop down a side street, you know, um, a Native American healer, a medicine man, so to speak, a root woman like I grew up with. That's more what comes to our mind than, say, a herbal apothecary with a white guy sitting there surrounded by a library full of books. But in all honesty, that's just as legitimate as any of the others. And if you are of European heritage, you may find cures that work better for you if that's who you go to. That was the case for me. And again, I'm not making a broad general statement, but I remember just recently the great herbalist Susan Weed pointed out that turmeric, while it's a great anti-inflammatory for many people, is not as effective for people of Caucasian heritage as it is for people of Indian heritage. She said that for a lot of people of European descent, linden, basswood blossoms are much more effective. That explains a lot. There are a lot of people who swear by turmeric as an anti-inflammatory, and a lot of people said, I tried it, it didn't work for me. It irritated my stomach even. Yeah, well, those are people of two different ethnicities. Those are people of two different heritage. But that's all I'm saying, really. It's a very common sense thing. When I was, in my 20s and I was working hard in my career as a journalist at the time, and I was on the road all the time. I was not eating well. I was pulling long hours. I was just really a wreck, mentally and physically. It was really hard work what I did, and very high stress. I was actually on call like almost 24 hours a day. My phone would ring, and usually I was being chewed out by somebody. That's just kind of par for the course. It was a very high stress thing, and the Chinese formulas were not helping me at all. I was away from my teachers. They were hard to find and they were very expensive. And so I turned to Western medicine and over the counter products. That didn't help me either, but at least they were cheap and readily at hand. It was only when I came back to the mountains, Obamacare had passed and I could no longer afford health insurance being self employed. And, you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Yeah, right. Um, you like your insurance, you can keep your insurance. Yeah, right. Anyway, I'm sitting there and I'm remembering the herbs that I studied when I was younger, and I'm looking around, identifying them in the woods, and it just hit me that, my asthma and such was much more effectively treated with Angelica and black cherry bark and mullein than it was in any of these Chinese herbal formulas. Well, why am I not using growing right around me? Why am I looking for some exotic herb formulated for another person on another continent when I have all I need right here and all I have to do is just really dig in and study what's all around me? And it's such a common sense thing, but it's also so out of sync with our current culture in many ways. Culture that denigrates European culture and elevates non-European culture, when in truth, everybody's equally good and equally bad for the most part. I mean, every people on the face of the earth has fought unjust wars and enslaved other people. There are no good people. But in this day and age, we don't look at it that way. And in this day and age, we seem to think that something exotic and special and secret, maybe it's lost knowledge, right? Yeah, that's a reference to something I've said before. The Lost Book of Herbal Medicine is a phenomenally good, a fantastic herbal book. I hate the title because there's not a single thing in that book that's ever been lost. But it's marketing. You see, it's special, it's unique, it's something, they don't want you to know, right? Uh, but in truth, herbs are there for everybody. They're all around us. If you learn to identify what's in your backyard, if you learn to grow what you need in your garden, you're going to have herbs that are fresh and full of vitality, and you're absolutely sure they are what they say they are, because the very little secret is a lot of the herbs that come out of China, especially, are not what they claim to be. Our government does a very good job in policing Americans. They prohibit a lot of what we can do as herbalists. Imports coming in from other countries pretty much just pass right in, just right in. And I mean, this happened recently, was a couple years ago when there was all this poison-laced dog food. The dogs were dying. Veterinarians were saying, hey, something's going on here. It took months and months and months for our government to actually say, hey, yeah, some of these batches of dog food coming from China are tainted. For an American producer, it would have happened in the blink of an eye. I'm not blaming the Chinese for that, and I'm really blaming our own government for that. But the quality controls are not as stringent on imports as they are from domestic products. And even the domestic products are sometimes not what they claim to be, or not as fresh as they should be, or not handled as they should be. When you do it yourself, you get the best. Now, I mentioned formulas. That's not to say that these um, exotic to us herbs are any less effective. The Chinese herb Dang Xin is one of the most effective herbs for asthma and COPD in particular. It helps you exhale air more fully. It is an adaptogen that helps the body deal with stress, and it reduces inflammation in the lung. So in that case, that's an herb, but that herb combined in a formula, which is how I was first introduced to it, was ineffective. When I began taking the herb by itself, as I would in a more Western herb mindset, it began to work for me very well. Not only do I think the best diet you can have is what is fresh and local and in season, I think the best herbal medicine you can have is what's growing around you. It is very worthwhile to seek out. If there was a Native American tribe in your area, hopefully there still is that same tribe in your area. If their herbal medicine was ever recorded, get the book. A lot of these Native American herbals are very short and very small. Oftentimes I will buy, an herbal for a specific tribe and I get it and it's like less than 100 pages. And I'm thinking, why did I spend this much money on this book? I should have checked it out online before I got it. But there may be one or two herbs in there that aren't written about in another book. And that usually is the case, actually. And a lot of times, some tribes are reluctant to share their knowledge with people outside the tribe. So that may be another reason the book is so short. If they're in your area, get one and see how they use the plants growing around you. And then I think a good next step is to look at your genetics, look at your heritage, and say, where did my people come from? And get the herbals for where they came from. And start growing things that maybe aren't native to your area in your garden and become your own expert about your own health. If I can stress anything, that's always the message of my show. Learn everything you can about your health. You should learn everything you can about how to treat your own common ailments and those around you. And, for me, it's not only the Native American herbs and herbals, obviously, that I look to. In fact, that's maybe a third of what I do. And the Appalachian tradition and the German folk medicine tradition that I grew up would probably comprise the other third. One of the main things I do is study old medical texts and old botany books. One of my favorite resources is a book called Resources of the Southern Foods and Forests. During the Civil War, the Union blockaded the South. They would not allow any imports. So the Confederacy hired a French botanist to replace everything that was needed, from agricultural products to medicine, with what was growing natively in the region. He did a phenomenal book. It's several hundred pages long. It can be hard to find in print. You can find a copy on archive.org. All the medicine at that time, he found native plants through exhaustive research to replace. And it's an excellent book. All the plants that were growing here in the 1860s are still growing here, and I turn to that book all the time. I look at old pharmacy manuals like King's Medical Dispensary of 1898. I look at Thomsonians. I look at various groups. One that's really interesting is Towards, yes, it's Towards a Materia Medica of the United States by Benjamin Smith Barton, MD. It was written in 1810. Now, Benjamin Smith Barton is a really interesting guy. He was a botanist, a physician, and a naturalist. He wrote the first botany book in America. He was educated by Benjamin Rush, one of our founding fathers. His sister-in-law was David Rittenhouse's wife. David Rittenhouse was our first treasurer and engraver, if memory serves right. He was in many ways a contemporary of the founding fathers. So maybe half a generation younger, he was in regular correspondence with Thomas Jefferson, and a lot of his research and writing was in connection with a man named Andre Michaux. Andre Michaux was another French botanist. He was hired several times by Thomas Jefferson and our early government to go out into the wilderness and discover native plants and their uses. And a lot of his research was done right in my backyard. I literally have trails that go up to the Blue Ridge Parkway and all around Grandfather Mountain that are very close to my house. I mean, literally out my back door. Andre Michaud did a ton of his research on Grandfather Mountain and on Mount Mitchell and on the various peaks around in my area. This book, Towards an American Materia Medica, written in 1810, describes a plant and its uses and how Andre Michaud discovered it. And it has, it's not very long, but it's a very interesting resource. He was aware of the Thomsonians at the time. He was bringing in a lot of information from the eclectics and from Native American herbal medicine, a lot of what had been documented in Jamestown. And it's really good. And this is something that tells me a lot about a lot of the plants that are just right in my backyard and how they can be used, even wild edibles. So I've mentioned many times poke greens. I mean, I enjoy wild poke greens. He recommended eating the shoots of the plants when they come up. He said they were better than the finest asparagus. Now, this is really interesting because if in any field guide and wild edibles research you look for now, they're going to say just eat the leaves, just eat the young leaves, boil them a couple of times before they fry them. Basically, the leaves have little to no toxicity whatsoever. What little bit, they try to cook it out. And, if you left it in, worst case scenario is you're going to throw up. Yeah, you can really seriously poison yourself if you eat the berries or the root. But the leaves in the early spring are traditionally eaten around here and have been for hundreds of years. It's really interesting to see that he was recommending the shoots because I've never seen that in any book whatsoever. But he said they could be eaten with impunity. I mean, he did not even recommend any kind of special, cooking process or anything. So that's a really interesting kind of window into not only herbalism but food in 1810 and the way people did things. So, wherever you are, that's another resource you can look for. These old books that may have been written by your state government or the federal government sent out botanists and such. You will find a lot of this in the early to mid 1800s. So another great resource you can turn to. And before I wrap things up today, I figured I've already mentioned Angelica. So Angelica is a really interesting herb. It's one that you'll find a lot written about in herbal lore. It really goes back to monastic medicine and the Middle Ages, and maybe even pre-Christian times. The name Angelica, it's Archangelica. It actually refers to the legend that the Archangel Gabriel presented this herb to humanity as a cure for plague. That legend was recorded by Taberna Montanus, who was really the father of botany, and it is closely related to legends of the Holy Spirit, whether angels or the Holy Spirit. It was believed to be a divinely revealed plant to mankind. And really, throughout the monastic period, it would have been in any formula for any cold or flu. It was thought to be a remedy for poison. It was actually used as a scent in hospitals to get rid of what they called plaguey or pestilent air, which is what we would now call germs. It's a pretty interesting herb. Officially in the monastic medicine, it was used to settle stomach, to stimulate digestion, to help break a fever. As an expectorant, it's a very good lung herb. It would have been used for colds, coughs, pleurisy, flatulence, colic, rheumatism, urinary troubles. It's one of those that's good for kidney stones. It would have been used in formulas with licorice and just it would have been used in just about everything, really. The flavor is somewhat sweet. It's a little licoricey, a little celery-like. It was actually an ingredient in most of the popular herbed wines and liqueurs of Europe. It was used in absinthe, vermouth, chartreuse, many. Uh, Even Rhine wine at one time was always flavored with Angelica to give it a better flavor to go with food. It's similar to celery in that regard, in that it has a flavor enhancing property. So you would have seen it included in all bitters formulas. It's in the Swedish bitters. It has a lot of religious significance. Like I said, it's used ceremonially in Poland. It's one of the herbs that are taken to the church to bless. It's called an herb of the Holy Ghost. It's much used in German folk medicine. Father Nate recommended it for all sorts of issues, anything to do with the stomach, any bowel pains, any digestive issues, again, colds, flus, anything for the lungs. It's probably most used these days in its Chinese form for menopausal issues. That's a cured form of Chinese Angelica. It's one of those herbs that, because it's not very strong or assertive in its action, it's usually included in formulas and it's often overlooked these days. One thing about Angelica, in its, especially when it's younger, when it's just growing, it can look a lot like wild hemlock, very deadly, deadly herb. The herb hemlock is, what was used as a poison in ancient Greece. As it grows up and grows out, it grows much larger, and it's very obvious that it's angelica. So if you do look for this one in the wild, be sure you know what hemlock looks like, and water hemlock and all those plants. They actually look a lot like Queen Anne's lace or wild carrot. The angelica will grow larger and the umbels are much more pronounced. They kind of come out in a star-shaped pattern with little balls at the end almost, and usually the stalk has a purplishness to it. When you see the two mature, you're not going to confuse them, but when it's young, you could definitely make that mistake. In Russian herbal medicine, which is somewhat like traditional Chinese herbal medicine in that it's more formal, the government put money in there to preserve what they were proud of as their, cultural, indigenous, we'll use that word again, medicine. Um, Angelica was used to treat hysteria, epilepsy, insomnia. It's expectorant, a diaphoretic, that means to help break fevers, and for all diseases of the respiratory system. Often used to treat rheumatism, pain in the lumbar region of the back. Angelica was so Angelica was one of the go-to herbs in England in the Elizabethan times, in the classic era of herbal medicine. John Gerard said the root of garden Angelica, that was just to differentiate it from the wild Angelica, this is just Angelica growing in your garden, he said is a singular remedy against poison, against the plague, and all infections taken by evil and corrupt air. If you do but take a piece of the root and hold it in your mouth, or chew the same between your teeth, it doth most certainly drive away the pestilential air. Yea, although that corrupt air have possessed the heart, yet it driveth it out again by urine and sweat, as rue and treacle and such like do. So I just love that language. I love the way they used to write about herbs back then. It was so, flowery. I mean, you know, at this time, Gerard's garden was like the greatest herbarium in England, and it was right beside William Shakespeare's house. So a lot of those plays, like Midsummer Night's Dream, were probably written right in this garden, and you can imagine the conversations that went on. And to be a fly on the wall, that would have been would have been a dream of mine. He also said it openeth the liver and the spleen, liver ailments for spleen ailments. It was one of the go-to herbs, and in fact, it became in its candied form a very popular confection. People would buy it at the apothecary and chew on it like candy, or make it in their own house, and it would be used like a cough drop, or just as a general preventive, or a stomatic, just to settle the stomach. And Culpeper recommended it for fevers, for a fit of ague, which was the fevers usually caused by malaria. And really interesting, he said the juice or water that it was steeped in, being dropped into the ears or eyes, helps dimness of sight and deafness. And he said that same juice put into what he called a hollow tooth would stop tooth pain. So, but more, probably most interesting of Gerard is he said a powder of the root was good for the biting of mad dogs. So I don't, obviously I would never recommend that anyone use herbs to try to treat rabies. I mean, pretty serious stuff. But at the time in the 1600s, they believed Angelica would cure rabies. So he said it doth wonderfully help. In fact, he said that the biting of mad dogs or any other venomous creature. It was very popular in Ireland. The best Irish herbal we have is by John Kehoe. It was written in the 1800s and recently republished in the 1980s probably as an Irish herbal. He said Angelica root pulverized and taken inwardly causes sweat, expels all noxious humors, and prevents any malignity that proceeds from the air. It also prevents the said malignity if being chewed in the morning before breakfast. A decoction of this herb helps cure palpitations, oppressions of the heart, and also helps promote urine. John Parkinson was really the most famous and influential herbalist of the 1500s, even more so than John Gerard. Parkinson in 1629, according to Miss Grieve in A Modern Herbal, said, puts Angelica in the forefront of all medicinal plants, and it holds almost as high a place among village herbalists today. She said that the plant, the rootstocks, leaves, and fruit possess carminative, that means settles the stomach basically, stimulant, diaphoretic, stomatic, tonic, and expectorant properties, which are strongest in the fruit, though the whole plant has the same virtues. Angelica is a good remedy for colds, coughs, pleurisy, wind, colic, rheumatism, and diseases of the urinary organs. So again, we're beginning to see a pattern here throughout several countries in several different centuries of how to use Angelica. And as it's one of my native plants, there's some growing just on the other side of the road that goes up to my house and plenty in the woods up behind them. It's one we will find in resources of the southern fields and forests. That states the root is edible and possesses more aroma than any of our indigenous plants. It is used in spasmodic vomiting, flatulence, colic, nervous headaches. Some say it is a powerful emmenagogue, that means it brings on menses. The vitis of some species are filled with a pungent oil. A candy is sometimes prepared with the root spoiled in sugar. The great fragrance of this root has caused it to be used for many purposes by the confectioner and others. The seeds are cordial, tonic, carminative, and the plant was in repute at one time as preventative of pestilence to those that bore it about them. So, like Gerard had said, just carrying the plant, just chewing on the root, just having some in your pocket was thought to ward off diseases. Just having it in hospital rooms in the Middle Ages was used to help dispel what we would now call germs from the rooms. He said it was very useful in fevers and diseases of the liver. Even in this time, this was in the 1860s, the root was preserved in vinegar and smelled by physicians at the prevalence of epidemics. So physicians were using the scent inhaled in the nose to keep from catching whatever epidemic was in the area at the time. Now it's also interesting because Angelica is in the same family as Osha. Osha or Lamatium was much used by Native American tribes for essentially the same thing and has been shown to have very strong antiviral properties. But even just carrying it about the neck, like on a little, in a little pouch, and smelling it was used to, they believed, prevent catching whatever was going around. So there you have two different cultures. French botanist writing in the 1860s, basically the same thing that Plains Indians, Western tribes Indians had believed centuries earlier, and many continue to believe today. Osha is one of our hardest to get herbs because, one, it doesn't grow very prevalently anyway, but when it does, it's often over harvested. But these people would have had no contact. There was no exchange of ideas. And here we're finding two traditions, one European and one really Western Plains Indians, coming up with the same similar plants in the same family. So I always find that interesting, and I think that's empirical evidence that these are probably a strong sign of validity, what we would call folk knowledge or learning through experience, and that tested over generations to me is absolutely as valid as something someone can prove in a laboratory and see under a microscope. But officially in modern use, Plants for a Future said medicinal uses of Angelica. Angelica has a long folk history of use as a medicinal herb, in particular for treatment of digestive orders and problems with blood circulation. The root is the most active medicinally. It should be harvested in the autumn of the first year's growth, sliced longitudinally if necessary, and dried quickly. If well stored, the root retains its medicinal values for many years. The leaves and seeds can also be used. The leaves are harvested and dried in late spring before the plant comes into flower. The plant is antispasmodic, carminative, diuretic, expectorant, stimulant, stomatic, and tonic. An infusion is used to ease flatulence, indigestion, chronic bronchitis, and typhus. It stimulates blood flow to the peripheral parts of the body, and so is of value in treating poor circulation. It is considered a specific treatment for Buerger's disease, a condition that narrows arteries in the hands and feet. Angelica is contraindicated for people with a tendency toward diabetes, since its use can increase sugar levels in the urine. The plant should not be prescribed for pregnant women, nor should the juice be allowed to come in contact with the eyes. An essential oil from the seeds is sometimes used as a rub to relieve rheumatic conditions. And Dong Quai is the Chinese version. Anybody who's interested in herbs is familiar with Dong Quai. It is one of the most used herbs for menopausal conditions, and it's essentially a cured angelica root. It's processed in a very specific way, and it's used in many formulas. And according to Michael Moore, the herbalist, the seeds were a sedative. Angelica, just a really interesting plant, one you're going to see all over the place in the Appalachian Mountains. Good for food and medicine, and really just a foundational part of my herbal journey, because I think that was the first herb I was taught to identify. In fact, I still have a paper plate that Rosie Hicks was the herbalist that I learned from. She gave to my mother, that has written on the back of it everything that Angelica was good for. And the way she would do it is she would write that on the back of the plate and put the root on it. And that was one of the ways she helped us learn to identify things. But it was so important that I be able to tell Angelica apart from hemlock that that was the first herb I think I was. That was the first herb I was taught to identify. So that really kind of takes me back to the roots of this, and the roots of this whole discussion of how when I came home to the mountains and saw the herbs that worked for me at one time, I came back to my roots and started using them again, and that's what set me on the journey to do all of this. So y'all have a great week. I hope you enjoyed this one. Remember to check out my new book, Growing Your Survival Herb Garden, for preppers, homesteaders, and everyone else. It actually tells you how to grow Angelica in your garden, by the way. It's you can get it directly from me in ebook form through either my website, judsoncarroll.com, or my blog, southernappalachianherbs.blogspot.com, or you can get the print copy or a Kindle version or whatever you need in that regard from Amazon. I have 6 books out now. They've all been very well received, but I've been very surprised and pleased how well this one, the new one, is being received. And be sure to visit my Substack. When you type in judsoncarroll.com, it redirects to my Substack, and there you can sign up for my free newsletter. I'm putting out regular content on that, and people are signing up by the dozens, which is pretty cool. And it's really growing. And all this year, I'm going to be doing a lot of gardening tips and a lot of herb information. You can always get in touch with me through my Substack, through judson@judsoncarroll.com, or southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you. I'm always glad to answer questions. Just don't hesitate to get in touch. Y'all have a good one, and I'll talk to you next time. The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.